My name is Samantha Reed, and I'm 26 years old. I never thought I'd be standing outside my childhood home on Thanksgiving morning with my suitcases packed, tears streaming down my face after my own mother told me I was no longer welcome at our family table. All because my sister Madison chose her fiancé Derek over her own blood. But what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and how far someone will go for money. As Derek approached me with that sinister smile, ready to reveal his true plan, I had no idea that my entire family was walking straight into a deadly trap. Before we dive into this shocking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Trust me, you won't believe what Derek confessed to me next, and how it nearly destroyed my entire family forever. 6 months before that devastating Thanksgiving morning, my life was completely different. Madison and I had always been incredibly close despite our 2-year age gap. We shared everything, from childhood secrets to career advice, and I genuinely thought nothing could ever come between us. I was working as a successful marketing manager at a prestigious firm in downtown Chicago, while Madison had just finished her master's degree in art therapy and was starting her dream job at a children's hospital. Our parents, Robert and Linda Reed, had raised us in their beautiful suburban home with strong family values and unconditional love. We were the kind of family that others envied, with weekly dinners, holiday traditions, and genuine care for each other's well-being. That perfect dynamic shattered the moment Derek Thompson walked into our lives. He was 32, charming, and seemingly successful as a financial consultant. Madison met him at a coffee shop near her workplace, and within weeks, she was completely smitten. At first, I was happy for her because she'd been single for almost 2 years after a difficult breakup. Derek seemed attentive and caring, always bringing her flowers and planning romantic dates. He was handsome in that polished, professional way that impressed parents, with his perfectly styled brown hair, expensive suits, and confident smile that could light up a room. But something about Derek immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. During our first family dinner together, I noticed how he subtly controlled the conversation, steering it away from topics that didn't interest him. When Madison tried to share a funny story from work, Derek would interrupt with his own anecdotes, effectively silencing her without seeming rude. He had this way of touching her arm or shoulder that looked affectionate but felt possessive to me. Most concerning was how he isolated her from conversations with the rest of us, creating this invisible bubble where only his opinions mattered. Within just a few weeks of dating Derek, Madison began changing in ways that alarmed me deeply. My outgoing, confident sister became quieter and more withdrawn during family gatherings. She stopped calling me for our usual late-night conversations, claiming she was too busy with Derek's social events and business functions. When I tried to make plans with just the two of us, she would hesitate and then explain that Derek preferred she check with him first before making commitments. This was completely unlike the independent woman I'd known my entire life. Derek's charm offensive on our parents was masterful and calculated. He researched their interests beforehand, engaging Dad in detailed conversations about vintage cars and impressing Mom with his knowledge of gardening and home renovation. He brought expensive wine to dinners and insisted on paying for elaborate family outings to upscale restaurants. Within a month, Mom was calling him the perfect gentleman, and Dad was praising his business acumen and financial stability. They saw him as the ideal husband for Madison, someone who could provide security and success. The first major confrontation happened during a family barbecue in July. I pulled Madison aside when Derek was distracted talking business with Dad, and gently expressed my concerns about how isolated she seemed. I pointed out that she'd stopped pursuing her photography hobby, had declined multiple invitations from her longtime friends, and seemed to defer every decision to Derek's preferences. Madison's response shocked me completely. She became defensive and angry, accusing me of being jealous because I was still single while she'd found someone who truly loved her. She claimed I was inventing problems because I couldn't stand seeing her happy and settled. Derek's counterattack against me was subtle but devastatingly effective. He began making offhand comments to my parents about how stressed I seemed at work, how I'd been drinking more wine at family dinners, and how my questions about their relationship showed concerning jealousy. He painted himself as worried about my mental state, suggesting I was projecting my own relationship failures onto Madison's happiness. He never said anything directly critical, but his concerned tone and strategic observations gradually poisoned my parents' perception of my intentions. Over the following months, I watched helplessly as Derek systematically turned my family against me. He convinced them that my warnings about his controlling behavior were actually signs of my own instability and resentment. When I tried to discuss specific examples of his manipulation, my parents would dismiss my concerns as misinterpretation or jealousy. Derek had positioned himself as Madison's protector against my supposed negative influence, and my family began treating me like a disruptive outsider rather than a caring sister. The Thanksgiving ban was Derek's final masterstroke in isolating Madison completely. 2 weeks before the holiday, he told my parents that I'd threatened him during a private conversation, claiming I'd said terrible things about their relationship and made him fear for Madison's safety. This was completely false, but Derek's tearful, concerned performance convinced them that I was becoming dangerously unstable. Mom called me the night before Thanksgiving, her voice shaking as she explained that Derek felt unsafe having me at family gatherings, and maybe it would be best if I spent the holiday elsewhere until I could get professional help for my jealousy issues. Standing on my parents' front porch that Thanksgiving morning, clutching my overnight bag and trying to process being exiled from my own family, I never expected Derek to approach me with such confidence. He walked out of the house where my family was preparing our traditional feast without me, and his entire demeanor changed the moment we were alone. The caring, concerned mask he'd worn for months completely disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating expression that sent chills down my spine. His voice dropped to a menacing whisper as he looked around to ensure we couldn't be overheard by anyone inside the house. Derek's confession hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. He revealed that everything about his relationship with Madison had been carefully planned from the moment he first saw her at that coffee shop. He hadn't been there by coincidence, he explained with disturbing pride. He'd been researching wealthy families in the area and discovered that Madison was the beneficiary of a substantial trust fund from our late grandmother, worth over $2 million that she'd inherit fully upon marriage or her 30th birthday, whichever came first. Derek had spent weeks learning her routine before orchestrating their seemingly chance encounter. The master plan Derek outlined was more sinister than I could have imagined. He'd deliberately studied psychological manipulation techniques, reading books on emotional control and attending seminars on persuasion and influence. His goal was to systematically destroy Madison's connections to family and friends, making him her sole source of support and validation. He explained how he'd researched each family member's personality, identifying me as the biggest threat to his plan because of my close relationship with Madison and my naturally suspicious nature. Derek described his financial motive with chilling detachment, explaining that Madison's inheritance was just the beginning. He'd convinced her to make him the beneficiary of her life insurance policies and had secretly encouraged her to increase the coverage amounts. His plan involved a carefully staged accident during their honeymoon, designed to look like a tragic mishap that would leave him a grieving widower with access to millions of dollars. He spoke about Madison's death as if discussing a business transaction, with no hint of remorse or humanity. What terrified me most was Derek's admission that this wasn't his first time targeting a wealthy woman. He casually mentioned previous relationships that had ended tragically, speaking about former girlfriends and even wives who'd suffered convenient accidents after changing their wills in his favor. He'd perfected his system over years of practice, learning from each experience to become more sophisticated in his approach. The realization that my sister was dating a serial predator made my blood run cold. My hands shook as I discreetly activated my phone's recording function, capturing Derek's confession while maintaining eye contact and pretending to be frozen in shock. He seemed to enjoy my horror, feeding off my fear as he described exactly how he'd manipulated each family member. He revealed knowing about Dad's financial insecurities and Mom's desire for Madison to marry well, using this knowledge to position himself as the perfect son-in-law while simultaneously undermining my credibility. Derek's threat was delivered with calm certainty that made it even more terrifying. He warned that if I attempted to expose his plan, he'd already laid groundwork to discredit me completely. He had documentation of my supposed drinking problem, witnesses who'd testify to my erratic behavior, and even a consultation with a psychiatrist who'd evaluated my mental state based on Derek's carefully crafted descriptions of my actions. He'd prepared for the possibility that I might discover his deception and had created an elaborate backup plan to destroy my reputation and credibility. When I finally gathered courage to return to the house with my recorded evidence, my family's reaction crushed my spirit completely. I played Derek's confession for Madison, Mom, and Dad in our living room, expecting immediate outrage and protective action toward my sister. Instead, Madison stared at me with hurt and disbelief, claiming the recording was obviously fake and demanding to know how far I'd go to destroy her happiness. She accused me of hiring someone to impersonate Derek's voice or using technology to manipulate the audio. Madison's choice to believe Derek over her own sister, even when presented with clear evidence, represented a betrayal deeper than anything I'd experienced. She defended him passionately, explaining that he'd already warned her I might try something desperate like creating fake evidence. Derek had anticipated this exact scenario and had prepared her to reject any proof I might present. Watching my sister choose her manipulator over recorded evidence of his evil intentions broke my heart in ways I didn't think were possible. My parents' response was equally devastating, though their betrayal felt different. Mom and Dad didn't even listen to the entire recording before dismissing it as proof of my deteriorating mental state. They expressed concern about the lengths I'd apparently gone to fabricate evidence against Derek, suggesting I needed professional help to deal with my jealousy and obsession. Dad actually apologized to Derek for having to endure such accusations from his future sister-in-law, while Mom hugged Madison protectively as if I were the threat to her safety. The family meeting that followed felt like a trial where I was the defendant and Derek was both prosecutor and judge. He played the role of the hurt, confused victim perfectly, expressing sadness about my obvious mental health struggles and offering to pay for therapy to help me work through my issues. My parents ate up his performance, praising his patience and understanding in dealing with such a difficult family situation. The more I insisted the recording was real, the more convinced they became that I'd lost touch with reality entirely. The formal exile from my family came just 3 days after Thanksgiving, delivered through a painful conversation that still echoes in my mind. Mom and Dad called me to their house for what they described as an intervention, but it felt more like a funeral for the relationship we'd once shared. They sat across from me in the living room where I'd grown up, their faces filled with disappointment and concern, explaining that they'd consulted with Derek and decided that my presence was too disruptive for Madison's well-being and their family's peace. Dad spoke in the measured tone he'd used during my childhood when delivering serious consequences, explaining that they were asking me to find my own place to live and limit contact with the family until I received professional help for my jealousy and apparent break from reality. Mom cried as she spoke, but her tears felt like accusations rather than sympathy. She expressed heartbreak over watching me become someone she no longer recognized, someone consumed by bitterness and destructive behavior toward my own sister's happiness. From the kitchen window, I could see Derek sitting at our family table with Madison, both of them watching my humiliation with vastly different expressions. Madison looked genuinely sad and conflicted, occasionally wiping tears as she witnessed my parents formally disowning their eldest daughter. Derek, however, couldn't completely hide his satisfaction, occasionally allowing small smiles to cross his face when my parents weren't looking directly at him. His victory was complete, and he knew it. My desperate attempts to reach extended family for support initially showed promise but ultimately led to even deeper isolation. Uncle Frank, my father's brother who'd always been like a second dad to me, listened carefully to my concerns when I called him that evening. He'd noticed Derek's controlling behavior during a recent family gathering and admitted having his own reservations about the relationship's rapid progression. For a brief moment, I felt hope that at least one family member would stand with me against Derek's manipulation. Derek's expansion into extended family manipulation proved his sophistication and long-term planning capabilities. Within a week of my conversation with Uncle Frank, Derek had reached out to him directly, expressing concerns about my mental state and sharing carefully edited examples of my supposed erratic behavior. He positioned himself as genuinely worried about me, asking Frank's advice on how to help someone who seemed to be having a psychological breakdown triggered by jealousy and possible substance abuse issues. The false evidence Derek planted was masterfully crafted and impossible for me to disprove without seeming even more unstable. He'd saved screenshots of social media posts I'd allegedly made but had no memory of creating, showing erratic behavior and concerning statements about Madison's relationship. He had receipts from bars where I'd supposedly been drinking heavily on weeknights, and even witness statements from people claiming to have seen me following him and Madison on dates. Every piece of evidence was plausible enough to seem real but false enough to drive me to frustrated denials that only made me appear more unhinged. Madison's engagement party became the most painful public display of my exile from the family I'd known my entire life. The celebration was held at an upscale country club, with dozens of family friends and relatives celebrating what they believed was wonderful news for Madison and Derek. I sat in my car across the street, watching through the large windows as my parents proudly introduced Derek to everyone, sharing stories about his successful career and devotion to their daughter. From my distant vantage point, I observed Derek working the room with practiced charm, shaking hands with uncles and cousins while keeping one possessive hand on Madison's back. My sister looked beautiful in her new engagement dress, but even from across the street, I could see tension in her posture and a forced quality to her smile. She kept glancing toward the windows as if hoping to see me there, but Derek would redirect her attention each time she seemed distracted from the celebration. My introduction to Mrs. Catherine Sullivan proved to be the first ray of hope I'd experienced in weeks of escalating family destruction. Catherine was our elderly neighbor who'd lived next door to my parents for over 15 years, known for her sharp wit and protective nature toward families on our street. She approached my car that evening as I sat watching the engagement party, tapping gently on my window with concern etched across her weathered face. Catherine revealed that she'd been observing Derek's behavior carefully ever since Madison brought him to family gatherings, and her decades of experience reading people had triggered serious alarm bells. She'd witnessed him threatening Madison privately in the backyard during a recent barbecue, his voice low and menacing while his body language suggested barely contained anger. Madison had cowered against the fence as Derek gestured aggressively, and Catherine had been disturbed enough to consider calling the police until Derek's demeanor changed completely when other family members approached. The evidence of Derek's growing abuse toward Madison came in subtle signs that Catherine's trained eye caught but my family missed. Madison had shown up to recent gatherings with carefully concealed bruises on her arms and what appeared to be finger marks around her wrists. When asked about these marks, Madison would quickly cover them and explain clumsily about falling downstairs or bumping into furniture, but her explanations never matched the patterns Catherine observed. Uncle Frank's eventual betrayal hit me harder than my parents' rejection because I'd allowed myself to hope that his initial support meant someone in my family might still trust my judgment. When he called to inform me that he'd been wrong to encourage my delusions and that I needed to accept Derek as part of the family, his voice carried a coldness I'd never heard before. Derek had convinced him that enabling my jealousy would only make my mental health deteriorate further, and that the kindest thing would be to present a united family front supporting Madison's engagement until I sought professional help. The complete isolation felt like drowning in plain sight, watching my family celebrate what they believed was Madison's happiness while knowing the truth about the danger she faced. Every family member who'd once supported and loved me now viewed me as the problem, the jealous sister whose mental breakdown was threatening everyone's peace. Derek had achieved something remarkable and terrifying. He'd convinced an entire family that the person trying to save them was actually their greatest threat. The cheap motel room that became my temporary home was a far cry from the comfortable apartment I'd been forced to leave when Derek's manipulation campaign reached my workplace. The faded wallpaper, stained carpet, and constant noise from the highway outside served as daily reminders of how completely my life had unraveled. I'd been staying there for 3 weeks, surviving on savings while struggling to find new employment after Derek's systematic destruction of my professional reputation through carefully placed phone calls to colleagues and industry contacts. Derek's professional sabotage was as methodical as his family manipulation, targeting my career with precision strikes designed to make me unemployable in my field. He'd reached out to key clients at my marketing firm, expressing concerns about my mental stability and suggesting that my recent behavior might reflect poorly on the company's reputation. He provided just enough specific details about my supposed breakdown to seem credible while avoiding anything that could be proven false or traced back to him directly. The humiliation of losing my job came with additional cruelty as Derek ensured I understood his role in my professional destruction. Former colleagues who'd once respected my work now avoided my calls, having been convinced that associating with me could damage their own careers. The industry that had once offered me stability and success became another source of rejection and isolation, leaving me financially vulnerable and professionally ruined. Madison's wedding planning proceeded without my knowledge or involvement, a painful reminder that my sister was moving toward potential death while I remained powerless to protect her. Through social media posts and family communications that still reached me through distant relatives, I learned about dress fittings, venue selections, and catering choices for what was supposed to be the happiest day of Madison's life. Each update felt like watching a countdown to disaster, knowing Derek's timeline for her murder was approaching while my warnings fell on deaf ears. Catherine's decision to investigate Derek's background independently marked the turning point in my desperate situation, though I didn't immediately understand the significance of her casual visits to the motel. She would stop by with coffee and pastries, claiming concern for my well-being, but I later learned she was using these conversations to gather details about Derek that she could research more thoroughly. Her decades of experience as a retired librarian had taught her how to conduct thorough background investigations using public records and archived newspaper databases. The shocking discovery Catherine made about Derek's true identity shattered even my worst assumptions about his character and criminal history. After weeks of methodical research, she uncovered documentation proving that Derek Thompson was actually Brian Mitchell, a man with a documented pattern of targeting wealthy women across multiple states. His transformation from Brian to Derek had been complete, involving false identification documents, fabricated employment history, and carefully constructed social media presence designed to pass casual scrutiny. Catherine's investigation revealed Derek's criminal history was far more extensive and violent than I'd imagined possible. Brian Mitchell had been linked to the suspicious deaths of 2 previous wives over the past decade, both wealthy women who died in apparent accidents shortly after making him the primary beneficiary of substantial life insurance policies. Police investigations in both cases had been inconclusive due to lack of evidence, but the pattern was unmistakable to anyone examining the timeline of his relationships and financial gains. The newspaper articles Catherine discovered painted a terrifying picture of Derek's evolution as a predator, showing his increasing sophistication in selecting victims and avoiding prosecution. His first wife had died in a car accident that investigators suspected involved tampered brakes, but mechanical evidence had been inconclusive. The second wife had drowned during a vacation in Mexico, with Derek claiming she'd been drinking heavily and fell from their hotel balcony into a pool, but witnesses had reported hearing arguing before the incident. My near-complete breakdown occurred when Catherine first presented this evidence, as the reality of Derek's murderous history made Madison's immediate danger devastatingly clear. I'd known he was manipulative and controlling, but learning he'd actually killed previous wives sent me into a panic that felt like drowning in helplessness. The knowledge that my sister was engaged to a serial killer while my entire family celebrated their upcoming wedding created a desperation that nearly drove me to complete despair. Catherine's evidence represented the first real proof that Derek posed a genuine physical threat rather than just emotional manipulation, giving weight to my warnings that had previously seemed like jealous speculation. The police reports, death certificates, and insurance payouts created an undeniable pattern that even my family would struggle to dismiss as coincidence or jealous fabrication. For the first time in months, I had documentation that supported my instincts about Derek's dangerous nature. The moment of renewed hope came when Catherine spread the evidence across my motel room's small table, organizing newspaper clippings, police reports, and insurance documents into a timeline that clearly showed Derek's pattern of targeting, marrying, and killing wealthy women. Her thoroughness had uncovered details that individual police departments had missed because they hadn't seen the complete pattern across state lines. Together, we had enough evidence to potentially save Madison's life if we could find a way to make my family listen to facts rather than Derek's manipulation. The alliance between Catherine and myself formed naturally from our shared determination to save Madison, combining my intimate knowledge of Derek's manipulation tactics with Catherine's investigative skills and financial resources. We met daily in my motel room to plan our counterattack, spreading evidence across the small table while developing strategies to expose Derek's true identity and criminal history. Catherine's decades of experience dealing with difficult people and complex situations provided the steady leadership I desperately needed during my emotional crisis. Hiring retired Detective James Morrison required Catherine's savings, as my own financial resources had been depleted by Derek's professional sabotage and forced unemployment. Morrison had 30 years of experience with fraud and murder investigations before retiring from the Chicago Police Department, and Catherine had found him through a friend whose missing person case he'd solved years earlier. His initial skepticism about taking the case disappeared completely when Catherine presented Derek's pattern of suspicious wife deaths and insurance claims across multiple states. Madison's visible deterioration became increasingly apparent to anyone willing to look past Derek's explanations of wedding stress and career pressures. During the few glimpses I caught of my sister at public locations, she appeared to have lost significant weight, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy that suggested constant anxiety. Her once vibrant personality had been replaced by a subdued, fearful version that constantly checked Derek's expression before speaking or making decisions. Derek's control over Madison had intensified to the point of complete isolation from any support system outside his influence. Morrison's surveillance revealed that Derek monitored Madison's phone calls, limited her movements to work and wedding-related activities, and had convinced her to cut contact with longtime friends who'd expressed concerns about the relationship's rapid progression. Madison's world had shrunk to include only Derek and family members who supported their engagement, leaving her without any external perspective on her situation. The financial manipulation Catherine and Morrison uncovered was staggering in its scope and sophistication, involving Derek's systematic access to Madison's personal wealth through carefully orchestrated legal maneuvers. He'd convinced her to give him power of attorney for wedding planning purposes, claiming it would simplify vendor payments and venue bookings. This legal authority had allowed him to begin transferring substantial amounts from Madison's accounts to offshore holdings under his control. Morrison's discovery that Derek's real name was actually Daniel Richardson added another layer to his false identity, revealing a criminal sophistication that suggested years of practice evading law enforcement. Daniel Richardson had been investigated but never charged in connection with suspicious deaths in 3 different states, always managing to avoid prosecution through careful planning and legal maneuvering. His transformation into Brian Mitchell and then Derek Thompson showed a pattern of reinvention designed to stay ahead of any long-term investigation. The revelation of Derek's multiple identities explained how he'd avoided capture for so long, creating new personas whenever suspicions arose around his activities. Each identity came with fabricated employment history, social security documentation, and banking records sophisticated enough to pass standard background checks. His current Derek Thompson persona was his most elaborate creation, designed specifically to attract and manipulate Madison while appearing completely legitimate to family members and authorities. Morrison's timeline of Derek's current plan revealed the horrifying proximity of Madison's planned murder, scheduled for their honeymoon trip to Bermuda immediately following the December wedding. Derek had already purchased non-refundable airline tickets and booked accommodations at a secluded resort where accidents could be staged without witnesses. The insurance policies he'd convinced Madison to purchase totaled over $5 million, all naming him as the primary beneficiary in case of her death. The setup for my arrest came when Derek discovered our investigation through his monitoring of Madison's communications and family interactions. He'd noticed Catherine's increased presence around the family and my more frequent appearances in the neighborhood, correctly deducing that we were working together to expose him. His response was swift and characteristic of his manipulative nature, using his established credibility with my family to turn our investigation against us. Derek's fabricated police report claimed I'd been stalking both him and Madison, making threatening phone calls, and attempting to break into their shared apartment multiple times. He provided detailed dates, times, and descriptions of incidents that had never occurred but were specific enough to seem credible to investigating officers. His calm, professional demeanor during police interviews contrasted sharply with my emotional responses, making his accusations appear more believable than my desperate denials. The night I spent in county jail on Derek's false charges represented the lowest point of my entire ordeal, sitting in a concrete cell while knowing Madison's wedding date was approaching rapidly. The irony of being arrested for trying to save my sister's life while her actual murderer planned her death created a despair so profound I struggled to maintain hope. Derek had successfully used the legal system to neutralize the only person actively working to protect Madison from his planned violence. The legal consequences of Derek's false accusations included a restraining order preventing me from contacting any family member or approaching their homes, effectively silencing me during the most critical period before Madison's wedding. His high-powered attorney worked to build criminal charges that would keep me in prison through the wedding and honeymoon, ensuring I couldn't interfere with his final plans for Madison. The legal system that should have protected my sister instead became Derek's weapon against the only person trying to save her life. The restraining order Derek obtained against me created a legal trap that made any attempt to warn Madison about her impending murder into a criminal violation punishable by immediate arrest. His attorney had crafted the order's language specifically to prevent me from communicating with any family member directly or indirectly, including through Catherine or other intermediaries. The legal system was now enforcing Derek's isolation of Madison while providing him legal protection against interference with his plans. Derek's choice of a high-powered criminal defense attorney revealed the financial resources he'd accumulated through previous murders and the sophisticated legal planning that protected his criminal activities. The lawyer's reputation for defending wealthy clients against serious charges suggested Derek had prepared for the possibility of facing murder accusations and had retained counsel capable of creating reasonable doubt even in the face of substantial evidence. This legal protection gave him confidence to accelerate his timeline for Madison's death. Madison's hospitalization after what Derek described as an accidental overdose of sleeping pills marked an escalation in his violence that terrified everyone who witnessed her condition. She was found unconscious in their apartment by Derek, who claimed she'd been struggling with wedding stress and had mistakenly taken too many prescription sleep aids. The doctors who treated her noted inconsistencies in Derek's story and the pattern of medication in her system, but lacked evidence to challenge his account officially. The hospital visit restrictions Derek implemented prevented any family member from speaking with Madison privately about the overdose incident, maintaining his control even during her medical crisis. He positioned himself as her protective fiancé, explaining to medical staff that family stress was contributing to her mental health struggles and requesting limited visitation to support her recovery. My restraining order made it impossible for me to visit at all, while Derek monitored all other family interactions to prevent any questioning of his version of events. Catherine's infiltration of Derek's wedding planning as a volunteer coordinator represented a brilliant strategy to get close enough to record his admissions about Madison's planned murder. She convinced the wedding planner that she wanted to help with last-minute details as a family friend, using her age and grandmotherly appearance to seem harmless and trustworthy. Her access to wedding meetings and vendor communications provided opportunities to observe Derek's behavior when he believed himself unmonitored. The recording device Catherine wore during wedding planning sessions captured Derek's increasing arrogance about his plan and his confidence that Madison's death would appear accidental to investigators. He spoke casually about the Bermuda resort's safety record and the ease of staging drowning accidents in remote locations, treating Madison's planned murder as a logistical challenge rather than the death of someone he claimed to love. His callous discussion of insurance claim procedures revealed extensive experience with the aftermath of suspicious deaths. Derek's admission that Madison's overdose had been a practice run for her planned murder demonstrated his escalating violence and willingness to risk exposure for the sake of perfecting his methods. He explained to Catherine, still believing her to be a helpful wedding volunteer, that testing Madison's response to different medications would help him calculate the precise dosage needed to incapacitate her during their honeymoon. The overdose had been his way of ensuring his final plan would work flawlessly. The December timeline Derek revealed showed his careful planning for Madison's death, scheduled for the third night of their honeymoon when resort staff would be less attentive to guest activities. He'd researched the local authorities' investigation procedures for tourist deaths and had prepared explanations for Madison's tragic accident that would satisfy a cursory inquiry. His confidence in avoiding prosecution came from experience with previous murders and knowledge of how to manipulate local law enforcement in foreign countries. Morrison's breakthrough in connecting Derek to a larger criminal organization expanded the scope of our investigation and provided federal authorities with jurisdiction to pursue charges across state lines. The detectives' contacts in other police departments had uncovered evidence that Derek was part of a sophisticated network targeting wealthy women throughout the United States. This criminal organization provided false identity documents, legal support, and money laundering services that enabled members to continue their activities without detection. The insurance policies Derek had secretly purchased on Madison's life totaled over $5 million, representing the largest payout he'd ever attempted and explaining his willingness to risk exposure by moving quickly with their relationship. Multiple insurance companies had issued policies based on Derek's claims about Madison's business partnership with him and their shared financial obligations. The documentation showed careful preparation for proving financial hardship and devastation following her tragic death. My parents' refusal to visit me during my jail stay and their complete support for Derek's version of events represented the final betrayal that convinced me our family might be irreparably damaged by his manipulation. Mom and Dad accepted Derek's explanation that my arrest proved their concerns about my mental health had been justified, and they expressed gratitude that Madison had someone stable to protect her from my supposed instability. Their choice to support Derek over their own daughter showed how completely he'd poisoned their judgment and natural protective instincts. Derek's direct threat against Catherine came when he began suspecting her increased involvement with wedding planning and her questions about honeymoon arrangements that seemed unusually specific. His confrontation with her in my parents' driveway revealed the violence barely contained beneath his charming exterior, as he grabbed her arm and warned that interfering with his family would have serious consequences. This physical aggression toward an elderly woman demonstrated his willingness to harm anyone who threatened his plans, regardless of their perceived innocence or vulnerability. Catherine's successful recording of Derek admitting to planning Madison's murder provided the breakthrough evidence needed to involve federal authorities in stopping his criminal activity. The clear audio captured Derek describing specific details of how he intended to kill Madison during their honeymoon, including his methods for making her death appear accidental and his plans for claiming the insurance money afterward. This direct confession gave law enforcement probable cause for immediate intervention. Detective Morrison's presentation of our evidence to the FBI's white-collar crime unit triggered a federal investigation that expanded far beyond Derek's planned murder of Madison. The Bureau's analysis of Derek's pattern of targeting wealthy women across state lines made this a federal case involving multiple jurisdictions and potential RICO charges for organized criminal activity. The investigation revealed Derek's connection to a sophisticated network of criminals specializing in romance fraud and murder for financial gain. The federal investigation uncovered evidence that Derek's criminal activities crossed international borders, involving money laundering operations in offshore banking centers and coordination with criminal contacts in countries where he'd staged previous murders. His sophistication level impressed even experienced FBI agents, who noted the careful planning and legal preparation that had allowed him to avoid prosecution for so many years. The Bureau's resources were necessary to unravel the complex web of false identities and financial manipulation Derek had created. Madison's gradual awakening to Derek's controlling behavior began during her hospital stay when medical staff expressed concerns about her overdose and the inconsistencies in Derek's account of finding her unconscious. Nurses noted Derek's aggressive insistence on controlling her medical information and his attempts to limit her interactions with doctors who asked detailed questions about her mental health and relationship dynamics. These professional observations planted seeds of doubt that began growing despite Derek's continued manipulation. Derek's desperation became apparent when he realized federal investigators were closing in on his operations, forcing him to accelerate his timeline for Madison's murder from their planned honeymoon to a much sooner date. His carefully laid plans began unraveling as the pressure of investigation made him increasingly paranoid and aggressive, abandoning the patient manipulation that had characterized his approach in favor of more direct control and intimidation tactics. The decision to move their wedding from the planned December date to Christmas Day represented Derek's attempt to complete his plan before federal authorities could build a strong enough case to prevent the marriage and Madison's subsequent murder. He explained this change to family members as romantic inspiration, claiming he wanted to make Christmas Day eternally special by celebrating their love. The real motivation was his growing awareness that law enforcement was investigating his background and criminal history. My collaboration with FBI agents while still under Derek's restraining order required careful legal maneuvering to protect me from additional criminal charges while ensuring Madison's safety. Federal prosecutors worked with local authorities to modify the restraining order's terms, allowing me to assist in the investigation under controlled circumstances. This cooperation agreement protected me legally while providing law enforcement with insider knowledge of Derek's manipulation tactics and family dynamics. The undercover operation involved FBI agents posing as wedding vendors and catering staff to monitor Derek's behavior and gather additional evidence of his criminal intentions. These surveillance efforts captured Derek's increasing paranoia and violent outbursts as he sensed the investigation closing around him. The agents noted his growing isolation of Madison and his escalating threats toward anyone who questioned their relationship or wedding plans. Derek's paranoia manifested in increasingly erratic behavior that concerned even family members who'd previously supported him completely. He began checking for surveillance constantly, changing their living arrangements multiple times, and restricting Madison's movements even more severely than before. His charm and patience disappeared as stress mounted, revealing glimpses of the violent personality he'd hidden throughout their relationship. Madison's terror became visible to family members who'd been blind to Derek's abuse when his increasing desperation made it impossible for him to maintain his caring fiancé facade consistently. She began showing physical signs of fear in his presence, flinching when he touched her and carefully monitoring his mood before speaking. These behavioral changes finally made some family members question whether Derek was truly the perfect partner they'd believed him to be. My willingness to risk everything in a direct confrontation to save Madison represented my last desperate attempt to break through Derek's manipulation and reach my sister before he could complete his plan to murder her. Despite the legal consequences I faced for violating the restraining order, I felt compelled to make one final effort to warn Madison about the evidence we'd uncovered regarding Derek's true identity and criminal history. Derek's physical attack on me during this confrontation revealed his violent nature to my parents for the first time, as they witnessed him losing control and becoming physically aggressive when his manipulation was challenged directly. His mask finally slipped completely when faced with evidence of his criminal past, showing the family the dangerous predator that had been hiding behind months of charming performance. This violence toward their daughter created the first cracks in my parents' faith in Derek's character and intentions. The Christmas Eve showdown that exposed Derek's true nature began during what was supposed to be a peaceful family dinner celebrating the upcoming wedding, but quickly escalated into a life-threatening confrontation when all the carefully hidden truths finally surfaced. Derek had been increasingly agitated throughout the evening, constantly checking his phone and scanning the windows as if expecting trouble, while Madison sat silently beside him looking pale and frightened in a way that finally caught our parents' attention. Derek's complete breakdown occurred when Detective Morrison arrived at the house with FBI agents and a warrant for his arrest on charges of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Faced with irrefutable evidence of his criminal past and recorded confessions of his plans to kill Madison, Derek abandoned all pretense of being the loving fiancé and revealed the cold, calculating murderer he'd always been beneath his charming exterior. His admission to previous murders came in a rage-filled rant as FBI agents surrounded the house and he realized escape was impossible. Derek screamed about the weakness of his previous wives, describing their deaths as necessary business decisions rather than the cold-blooded murders they were. He detailed how he'd killed them and made their deaths appear accidental, showing complete lack of remorse or humanity in his casual discussion of taking human lives for money. Madison's shock at hearing Derek confess to murdering his previous wives was visible and heartbreaking as she finally understood how close she'd come to becoming his next victim. Her face went white as she processed his admissions, realizing that every romantic gesture and loving word had been calculated manipulation designed to position her for murder. The man she'd planned to marry had been planning her death from their very first meeting. My parents' horror at realizing they'd been completely manipulated by Derek and had rejected their own daughter's accurate warnings about his dangerous nature was painful to witness. Mom collapsed into Dad's arms as they both understood how thoroughly Derek had poisoned their judgment and turned them against the daughter who'd been trying to save the family. Their guilt and shame were overwhelming as they realized their support for Derek had nearly enabled Madison's murder. Derek's desperate decision to take Madison hostage when cornered by evidence and surrounded by federal agents represented his final attempt to maintain control and escape justice for his crimes. He grabbed Madison and held a knife to her throat, demanding safe passage out of the house while threatening to kill her immediately if anyone attempted to stop him. His complete transformation from charming fiancé to violent criminal was terrifying to witness. The FBI raid that ended Derek's criminal career was swift and professional, with agents trained in hostage situations quickly neutralizing the threat he posed to Madison's life. Derek's years of avoiding law enforcement came to an end as he was subdued and arrested, finally facing justice for the murders he'd committed and the additional murder he'd been planning. His capture likely saved not only Madison's life but the lives of other wealthy women he would have targeted in the future. My vindication came at the cost of nearly losing my sister permanently, as Madison struggled to process the trauma of learning that the man she loved had been planning to murder her for money. Every moment of their relationship was now tainted with the knowledge of his true intentions, making recovery from the psychological manipulation incredibly difficult. The validation that my warnings had been correct provided little comfort given the pain Madison had endured. Derek's violent resistance during his arrest required significant force from FBI agents as he fought desperately against capture, knowing his criminal career was finally over and he would likely spend the rest of his life in prison. His mask had completely fallen away, revealing the vicious predator who'd hidden behind months of careful performance. The contrast between his public persona and his true nature was shocking even to law enforcement officers experienced with dangerous criminals. Madison's complete physical and emotional collapse following Derek's arrest required immediate medical attention as the full trauma of her narrow escape from murder hit her system all at once. She'd been living under constant stress and manipulation for months, and the sudden release from that pressure combined with the shock of learning Derek's true intentions created a medical emergency that hospitalized her for several days. The family reunification process began immediately after Derek's arrest, with my parents desperately apologizing for believing his lies and rejecting my warnings about his dangerous nature. Their guilt over supporting Madison's potential murderer while exiling the daughter trying to protect her created family trauma that would require months of healing and professional counseling to address. The damage Derek had done to our family relationships would take significant time and effort to repair. Catherine's heroism in investigating Derek's background and gathering the evidence that ultimately saved Madison's life made her an honorary family member who'd risked her own safety to protect someone else's child. Her courage in pursuing the truth when everyone else believed Derek's lies demonstrated the power of listening to instincts and taking action when someone appears to be in danger. Without Catherine's investigation, Madison would likely have died on her honeymoon while Derek claimed her insurance money. Derek's final threat of revenge against me as FBI agents loaded him into their vehicle showed his continued inability to take responsibility for his criminal actions or show remorse for the lives he'd destroyed. Even facing life imprisonment for his crimes, he blamed others for his situation rather than acknowledging the evil choices he'd made. His promise of retaliation revealed the ongoing danger he might pose even from prison. The medical emergency that required Madison's hospitalization following Derek's arrest highlighted the severe physical and psychological damage his manipulation had caused over months of emotional abuse and control. She was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and suffering from anxiety so intense it created physical symptoms requiring medical intervention. The evidence of Derek's abuse was written on Madison's body in ways that would take significant time to heal. The revelation that Derek had already stolen $800,000 from Madison's inheritance accounts showed the progression of his financial manipulation and how close he'd come to completely destroying her wealth before murdering her. His theft had been carefully disguised as legitimate expenses and investments, making recovery of the stolen money a complex legal process that would require extensive investigation and litigation. Madison's recovery process became a long journey requiring intensive therapy to address both the psychological manipulation she'd endured and the trauma of learning how close she'd come to being murdered by the man she trusted most. The specialized counseling for abuse victims helped her understand how Derek's techniques had systematically broken down her confidence and independence, making it possible for him to control every aspect of her life without her recognizing the danger she faced. Family therapy sessions provided a structured environment for all of us to process the damage Derek's manipulation had caused to our relationships and begin rebuilding the trust and communication that had been destroyed by his lies. Dr. Sarah Martinez, our therapist, helped my parents understand how sophisticated manipulators like Derek exploit family dynamics and natural protectiveness to turn family members against each other while positioning themselves as saviors and protectors. My parents struggle with guilt over how completely they'd been deceived by Derek, and their treatment of me during his manipulation campaign required extensive work to address and move past. Mom and Dad had to confront the fact that their desire for Madison to find a stable, successful partner had made them vulnerable to Derek's calculated charm offensive. They also had to process their rejection of me, the daughter who'd been accurately warning them about Derek's dangerous nature. The journey to rebuild my own confidence and sense of self-worth after months of being treated as unstable and dangerous by everyone I loved most was incredibly difficult and required professional support to navigate successfully. Derek's systematic destruction of my reputation and relationships had created deep insecurities about my judgment and worth that took time and therapy to overcome. Learning to trust my instincts again after being told they were signs of mental illness required considerable emotional work. Derek's conviction on multiple charges including attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, and racketeering resulted in a life sentence without possibility of parole, ensuring he would never again have the opportunity to target and kill innocent women. The federal prosecution was able to connect him definitively to his previous wife's murders, finally bringing justice for victims whose deaths had previously been classified as accidents. The families of Derek's previous victims finally received answers and closure when federal investigators reopened their cases with the evidence uncovered during his attempt to murder Madison. Women whose deaths had been dismissed as accidents were finally recognized as murder victims, allowing their families to understand what had really happened and see their killer face appropriate consequences for his crimes. Madison's gradual healing included reclaiming her independence and rediscovering the strong, confident woman she'd been before Derek's manipulation stripped away her sense of self. She returned to her work at the Children's Hospital and began pursuing photography again, activities that Derek had systematically discouraged during their relationship. Watching her personality return and her confidence rebuild was one of the most rewarding aspects of our family's recovery process. Catherine's friendship became a permanent and treasured part of our family's life, as we recognized her as the hero who'd saved Madison's life through her courageous investigation and willingness to risk her own safety to protect someone else's child. We celebrated her birthday as a family and included her in all major holidays and celebrations, ensuring she knew how much we valued her wisdom, bravery, and love. My career rebuilding process was supported by employers who understood that I'd been the victim of a sophisticated criminal's manipulation campaign rather than someone with actual professional problems. Detective Morrison provided references explaining Derek's systematic destruction of my reputation, and my former skills and experience eventually led to a position with a company that valued my resilience and crisis management abilities developed during this ordeal. Our family's first real Thanksgiving together in 2 years was an emotional celebration of survival, justice, and restored relationships that had nearly been destroyed by Derek's evil manipulation. We gave thanks not only for Madison's life being saved but for learning the importance of listening to each other and trusting family bonds over outsiders who might have hidden agendas. The holiday that had marked the beginning of our family's destruction became a celebration of our healing and renewed commitment to each other. Derek's life sentence provided peace of mind that he would never again be able to harm Madison or any other innocent woman, though we remained vigilant about his potential influence even from prison. His criminal organization was dismantled by federal authorities, preventing other predators from using the same sophisticated methods to target and kill wealthy women across multiple states. Madison's decision to become an advocate for domestic abuse victims transformed her trauma into a source of strength and purpose that helped other women recognize and escape dangerous relationships. Her speaking engagements at shelters and support groups shared the warning signs she'd missed and the manipulation techniques that abusers use to isolate victims from family support systems. Her work helped save other women from experiencing what she'd barely survived. The wisdom I gained from surviving Derek's systematic destruction of my family taught me to trust my instincts even when everyone around me questioned my judgment, and to persist in protecting people I love even when that protection isn't wanted or appreciated. The experience showed me that evil often wears attractive masks and that the people trying to save you are sometimes the ones others will call crazy or jealous. My developing relationship with Detective Morrison, which grew from professional cooperation into personal connection, provided hope for a future built on mutual respect and shared commitment to protecting innocent people from predators. His experience investigating criminals like Derek gave him unique understanding of what my family had endured, while his integrity and dedication to justice made him someone I could trust completely. The final lesson our family learned was that love and trust can survive even the most sophisticated manipulation if family members remain committed to healing and rebuilding together. Derek's attempt to permanently destroy our bonds ultimately failed because the foundation of genuine care and shared history proved stronger than his lies and manipulation. Our experience taught us that evil may be powerful, but love and truth are ultimately more powerful when people refuse to give up on each other. As I reflect on this traumatic period of our lives, I'm grateful that Madison survived Derek's planned murder and that our family found its way back to each other despite the damage his manipulation caused. The experience taught us to value the people who warn us about danger rather than dismissing them as jealous or unstable, and to remember that sometimes the most important thing we can do is trust our instincts about someone who seems too good to be true. What would you have done if someone in your family was dating someone who seemed perfect but gave you a gut feeling that something was wrong? Have you ever experienced a situation where your warnings about someone were dismissed by the people you were trying to protect? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible true stories about survival, family, and justice. If this story helped you recognize warning signs in your own life or someone you care about, please share it with others who might benefit from Madison's experience. Thank you for listening to our story, and remember that speaking up for someone you love is always worth the risk, even when others don't want to hear the truth. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never stop fighting for the people you care about most.